I used to live paycheck to paycheck until I met him. Private jets, designer clothes, and empty promises. Then she walked into his life and suddenly, the man who had everything was on his knees begging for what I'd given freely. A real heart. Before you judge my story or think you know how it ends, stay with me. What I'm about to share might save you years of heartache or help you understand why you deserve so much more than what you've settled for. This isn't just my story, it might be yours too. I never thought my life would become the kind of story people share online, but here we are. I'm Jade, and 2 years ago, I was just another girl with big dreams working 2 jobs to make rent in the city. My mornings started at the coffee shop downtown, afternoons at online classes for my business degree, and evenings waitressing at this upscale restaurant where people spent more on wine than I made in a week. But I was determined. My mom always said I had fire in my eyes, the kind that burns through obstacles. My apartment was tiny, a studio with a window that faced a brick wall, but it was mine. Every night, I'd sit on my second-hand couch planning my future business, sketching logos for a boutique I couldn't afford to open yet. My friends thought I was crazy, turning down nights out to save every extra dollar. Live a little, they'd say, but I was playing the long game. Then came that rainy Tuesday night. The restaurant was almost empty except for this one table, a business dinner that wouldn't end. And there he was, Anthony, in his tailored suit that probably cost more than my car, looking at me like he could see right through the practiced smile I gave all customers. When everyone left and he stayed behind, I assumed he needed his check. Instead, he asked about the sketch pad peeking out of my apron. No one had ever noticed that before. I still remember how he leaned forward when I reluctantly showed him my boutique plans. "You don't think small, do you?" he said, and something in his eyes made me feel like maybe I hadn't been dreaming big enough. When he left his card with a note to call him about investment opportunities, I almost threw it away. Men like him didn't invest in girls like me without wanting something in return, but curiosity got the better of me. One coffee meeting turned into dinner. Dinner turned into weekend getaways on his private jet. Suddenly, I was stepping into Porsches instead of the subway, sleeping in penthouses with views of the entire city. The whirlwind swept me right off my feet. He listened when I talked about my dreams, encouraged me to quit my jobs and focus on my business plan. "Let me take care of things," he'd say, and it felt like finally having room to breathe. My friends warned me it was happening too fast. My sister raised an eyebrow when he bought me a diamond bracelet after just 3 weeks. "What's the catch?" she asked. And deep down, I wondered too. Especially when he'd take calls in the middle of our dates, when his mood would shift if I asked about his past, when he'd insist I wear certain clothes to meet his friends. But when you're bathing in attention, after a lifetime of hustle, red flags just look like flags. And I was falling, hard and fast and willing to overlook anything that threatened this fairy tale I'd stumbled into. Before Anthony, my idea of luxury was splurging on name-brand cereal. After him, I found myself casually discussing thread counts and vintage wines like I'd been born into it. The day I moved into his penthouse, I stood frozen in the massive closet he'd cleared for me. "Fill it," he said with a smile that made my heart race. 2 days later, designers were bringing clothes to me, turning me into someone I barely recognized in the mirror. His world operated on a different frequency. Charity galas, where people donated more money in one night than my family had seen in generations. Business dinners, where I sat quietly while men discussed millions like it was pocket change. Weekend trips to Paris just because he missed the bread from this one bakery. I tried to belong, studied how the women around him spoke, moved, existed. They were all so polished, so effortlessly perfect. I was constantly aware of my edges, my roughness, the parts of me that didn't quite fit. "Just be yourself," Anthony would say, but then gently correct how I held my fork or whisper explanations of jokes I didn't understand. Each correction chipped away at who I was, but I told myself it was growth, not erasure. I stopped talking about my boutique dreams. They seemed silly and small, in rooms where people owned entire retail chains. Instead, I became his perfect companion, beautiful, agreeable, available whenever he called. The distance between us grew even as we shared the same bed. He'd be physically present but mentally elsewhere, checking his phone during our conversations. "It's just work," became his mantra. My birthday dinner, interrupted by a 2-hour call. Our anniversary, celebrated a week late because of a business emergency. I made excuses for him to others and to myself. "He's building an empire," I'd say, as if that explained the growing emptiness. I gave up my friends, my small apartment, my independence, all for the promise of this grand love. My schedule revolved entirely around his. When he needed me by his side at events, I was there, the perfect accessory. When he needed space, I wandered alone through our massive apartment, touching things that were mine, but never felt like they belonged to me. I'd catch glimpses of my old self sometimes, like a ghost in the background of our perfect Instagram life, wondering how much more I could bend before breaking. The night I realized I'd lost myself completely, I was standing in a bathroom at some gala, listening to 2 women talk about me. "She's his longest project yet," one laughed. "Wonder what he'll upgrade her to when he's done playing Pygmalion." I looked in the mirror, at the designer dress and the carefully highlighted hair, and couldn't remember the last time I'd made a decision that was truly mine. But leaving meant admitting I'd given everything for something hollow, and I wasn't ready for that truth. Not yet. I first saw her across a crowded charity auction. Unlike me, she didn't seem to be trying to blend in or impress anyone. She wore her natural hair in an elegant updo, her deep brown skin glowing against a simple gold dress. When she spoke, people leaned in, and when she laughed, it was full and genuine. Not the careful titter I'd cultivated for Anthony's business associates. I noticed him noticing her, but dismissed the twist of unease in my stomach. Men like Anthony always looked. It didn't mean anything. Until it did. Her name was Nia. A self-made tech entrepreneur who'd built her company from nothing, who spoke with passion about education initiatives in underserved communities, who carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are. I watched Anthony transform around her, more engaged, more animated than he'd been with me in months. When he introduced us, his hand lingered just a moment too long on her shoulder. "Nia's doing incredible things," he said, as if I hadn't been in the room during my own introduction. The changes were subtle at first. Late nights at the office became more frequent. His phone would go silent when I entered the room. He started mentioning her name in conversations, casual references to her insights, her business acumen, her perspective on things. "Nia thinks" became a regular part of his vocabulary, while my thoughts had long ago stopped being requested. I found the messages by accident. His iPad chimed while he was in the shower, and there they were. Conversations that started professional but had crossed into something more intimate. Plans being made. Inside jokes I wasn't part of. Nothing explicitly romantic, but the emotional affair was clear in every word. My stomach dropped as I scrolled through weeks of their exchanges, watching the man I loved slip away one message at a time. When I confronted him, there was no dramatic denial, no tearful apology. Just a cool assessment as he took his iPad from my hands. "You're overreacting. Nia is a business associate and friend." But his eyes couldn't quite meet mine. 2 days later, he suggested I take some time at a hotel while he handled a stressful merger. The merger had a name, and it wasn't business. 3 weeks in the hotel became a month. His calls grew less frequent, his excuses more transparent. I drove by the penthouse one night and saw her car in my parking space. The final conversation happened over coffee, public, controlled, brief. "We've grown in different directions," he said, as if we'd just naturally drifted apart, as if he hadn't systematically replaced me. He offered money, which felt like the final insult. as if my heart could be settled like a business transaction. I left with nothing but the designer clothes on my back and the shattering realization that I'd been an accessory he'd simply outgrown. The first month after Anthony was a blur of hotel rooms and unanswered texts. I'd wake up reaching for him, only to feel the cold emptiness beside me. I'd lost not just a man but an entire life. The penthouse, the social circle, the future I'd reimagined with him at the center. Some days I couldn't get out of bed. Other days I'd walk for hours through the city, passing places we'd been together, torturing myself with memories. Rock bottom came on a rainy Sunday when I found myself outside the restaurant where we'd met, peering through the window like a ghost haunting its own past. A waitress, probably me 2 years ago, caught my eye with a mixture of pity and concern. That's when I saw myself through someone else's eyes, pathetic, broken, defined by loss. I walked away and didn't stop until my legs ached as much as my heart. That night, in a cheap apartment I'd rented with the last of my savings, I pulled out my old sketchbooks. My boutique dreams looked back at me. Designs, business plans, the vision I'd abandoned for Anthony's version of success. I ran my fingers over the pages, reconnecting with the girl who'd drawn them, the one with fire in her eyes. She was still in me somewhere, beneath the designer clothes and polished manners. The next morning, I cut off the hair Anthony had always insisted I keep long. Each snip of the scissors felt like cutting away his control. I applied for retail jobs with my newly updated resume. One that had a 2-year gap I filled with personal business venture. 3 rejections later, a small local boutique took a chance on me. The owner, an older woman named Valerie, recognized something in my suggestions about display arrangements and customer experience. Within weeks, I was managing the floor. Evenings and weekends became about rebuilding my original dream. I started small. A collection of accessories I designed and crafted myself, sold on consignment through Valerie's store. When they sold out in a week, something shifted inside me. I wasn't just Anthony's ex-girlfriend. I was a creator, a businesswoman, someone with value beyond being desired. I reconnected with old friends, the ones who'd warned me, who I'd pushed away. Their forgiveness taught me about real loyalty. I joined a support group for women rebuilding after difficult relationships, where stories worse than mine put my pain in perspective. Slowly, I reclaimed pieces of myself. My laugh returned, genuine and unrehearsed. My opinions emerged without my first checking if they were acceptable. My body became mine again, not something to be displayed for someone else's status. The day I signed the lease on my own tiny storefront, using a small business loan Valerie had helped me secure, I realized Anthony's greatest gift to me was leaving. In losing everything, I'd found myself stronger, wiser, unbreakable in ways I never would have discovered in the shadow of his success. My boutique, Phoenix Rising, had been open 6 months when the fashion blog feature went viral. What started as a small write-up about local women entrepreneurs turned into a social media sensation when a celebrity stylist shared my custom accessories. Suddenly, my little shop had a wait list, and my designs were shipping nationwide. I hired 2 assistants, then 4. My days blurred into a beautiful chaos of creative fulfillment and well-earned exhaustion. I barely had time to follow gossip, but it found me anyway. A friend forwarded an article about Anthony's company facing investor scrutiny. Another showed me photos from a charity gala, Anthony and Nia, perfectly coordinated but standing with noticeable space between them, their smiles not quite reaching their eyes. I felt nothing but a distant curiosity, like watching characters in a movie I'd already seen. Then came that rainy Tuesday, exactly 2 years after we first met. The bell above my shop door chimed, and there he stood. Anthony looked the same, but somehow diminished, less mythical now that I had stopped looking up at him. He surveyed my creation, the exposed brick walls, the custom fixtures, the framed magazine features, with something like surprise. "You've done well for yourself," he said, as if my success were a curious anomaly. I thanked him politely and asked about his visit, maintaining the professional courtesy I would show any customer. That's when I saw it, the uncertainty in his eyes, the slight fidget of his usually steady hands. Anthony wasn't used to not being the most powerful person in a room. Over coffee in my office, my boundaries now firm enough to keep him out of my personal space, he unraveled. His company was struggling after a failed expansion. Investors were questioning his judgment, and Nia, brilliant, authentic Nia, had left him 3 weeks ago. She said I never saw her, he said with bitter irony, that I was too caught up in appearances to appreciate substance. What he didn't say, but I clearly heard, he was lonely. The man who collected people found himself suddenly without an audience. His voice cracked when he confessed he'd been thinking about me, about what we had, about how I'd loved him unconditionally, while Nia had demanded growth he wasn't ready for. The conversation shifted from reminiscence to suggestion, then to outright pleading. "We could try again," he said, reaching for my hand across the desk. "I made mistakes. I took you for granted." When I didn't immediately respond, his desperation increased. By our third meeting that week, he was literally on his knees in my clothes shop, offering everything: marriage, financial backing for my business expansion, the life he thought I still wanted. What struck me most wasn't his desperation, but his fundamental misunderstanding. He thought Nia had taught him about love by leaving. The truth was, she had taught him by being herself, unapologetically real in a world of facades. She had walked away, not as a lesson, but as an act of self-respect. And now, watching him beg, I finally understood my own worth had never been determined by his recognition of it. There's something powerful about standing at a crossroads you've been at before, but with entirely new eyes. Anthony knelt before me, offering everything I once would have given anything to hear. The fairy tale ending was right there, the millionaire humbled, the ordinary girl vindicated. But fairy tales end at happily ever after, never showing the quiet Mondays and difficult conversations that follow. I knew better now. "Get up," I said gently. "This isn't about kneeling or grand gestures." As he stood, I saw the boy beneath the man, someone who'd learned to acquire things, but never how to value them. For the first time, I felt no anger, no lingering hurt, just a profound compassion for us both. "Thank you," I told him, which clearly wasn't what he expected to hear. I thanked him for leaving me when he did, before I disappeared completely into his shadow. I thanked him for the harsh awakening that forced me to rebuild. Most surprisingly, I thanked him for finding Nia, a woman strong enough to walk away rather than diminish herself. "She didn't break you," I explained. "She refused to let you break her. There's a difference." We talked until the streetlights came on outside my shop, a real conversation without performance or agenda. I showed him my business plans, my dreams that now had nothing to do with him. He spoke about therapy, about questioning the values that had driven him to collect achievements and people like trophies. For the first time, we met as equals. When he asked again if there was any chance for us, I didn't hesitate. "No," I said with kindness but absolute certainty. "What we had wasn't love. It was a beautiful illusion we both needed at the time." His face fell, but there was relief there too. The performance could finally end for both of us. After he left, I locked up the shop and walked home through the city that had witnessed my unraveling and remaking. I passed the high-rise where I'd once lived in gilded isolation, feeling gratitude for my current apartment, smaller but filled with things I'd chosen, paid for with money I'd earned. I thought about texting Nia, not out of spite but genuine respect, to thank her for her unwitting role in my journey. But some threads are better left untied. That night, I added the final entry to the journal I'd kept throughout this chapter of my life. Not a neat ending, but a continuing evolution. I wrote about forgiveness, not just of Anthony or even myself, but of the narrative that says a woman needs rescuing or validation from someone else's desire. I wrote about wholeness that comes not from finding your other half, but from reclaiming all the pieces of yourself you've given away. The girl who once fell for a millionaire's attention isn't gone. She's here, integrated into the woman who now stands firmly in her own power. Her heart wasn't wasted, it was educated, and in the end, that education proved more valuable than all the penthouses and private jets in the world. If my journey resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by someone else's inability to see it. Drop a comment below sharing one way you're choosing yourself today. Remember, sometimes the greatest love story begins when you finally love yourself enough to walk away.